Record Maggie Phillips. Maggie Phillips is here. She has lent her expertise in creation of some of TV's film's most unique sounds. She worked on a little show called Fargo, which is an amazing show. Handmaid's Tale, one of my favorites, also a Hulu staple. Probably the first show I ever watched on Hulu, as a matter of fact. Netflix Umbrella Academy, starring Ellen Page and Mary J. Blige. Another classic, Mr. Robot, Ramy Malek, who did okay for himself last year, thanks to Freddie Mercury, playing Freddie Mercury. And the show, one of my son's favorite, Snowfall, which I have yet to see. But God bless John. Mary Ramos, known her for a long time. She's been doing this a couple weeks now. And she worked with a little director named Quentin Tarantino, which I'm sure a couple of you heard of. Did a couple movies like Django Unchained and most recently Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Hateful Eight. Mary has been there and done that, and we welcome her. Manish Raval, over the last 20 years, Manish and his partner Tom Wolfe have worked together at Aperture Music supervising film and TV. We worked together on a movie called Kingpin way back in the day that I did the soundtrack for, one of my favorites. Some of his credits include There's Something About Mary, Donnie Darko. On the TV side, he and Tom were nominated for an Emmy for Best Music Supervision for the amazing show Girls. Some of his other credits we'll talk about today: High Fidelity, The Boys, Preacher, Community, New Girl. Amazing credits, obviously. And he was the music editor on Green Book, Neighbors, and Trainwreck. Alison, who was going to join us, is ill, so she will not be joining today. So we wish her a speedy recovery. And we will kick into talking about some of our shows. So, Stephanie, again, Netflix.
Hulu.
Wu-Tang.
Oh, Wu-Tang.
I just read Netflix while I was getting my eyes off the screen. So the Wu-Tang, an American saga. I obviously grew up in Staten Island, so Wu-Tang were a big influence. The clip we're going to show in a minute was filmed at a place I used to bartend called Park Hill Tavern. And it was a bouncing nightclub full of all sorts of characters. But talk about working on that show and the obviously having a high profile, not just one, but group of individuals who it's their representative, their saga, their music. Talk about the process of picking music for a show and working with them on it.
Well, it was a lot of fun. RZA was very much, our guiding force on all things. I will say that working on this show was one of the most democratic, humanizing experiences. And I really think that RZA and his partner Alex sort of set the tone of if you come to the table, your voice will be heard. It was a really diverse group of people behind the camera across all departments. And it felt like, it just felt like, what I know and love New York to be, just like super diverse, super creative. Working on the music was fun. I mean, RZA operates in his own creative universe, and tapping into that is like something that is super sort of special. And I will say he's just like, as everyone could probably imagine, he's just like very open, super creative, and much more like about dialogue than I think I thought he would be. Kind of coming into the, television world, this was his first foray into television, and kind of wrapping his heads around things that you have to do to make production work and budget work and all those things manage. He was like very open to learning about it all and navigating it all. So it was great.
You had a co-supervisor, Tech from Sway and Tech's morning show. Tell me with him, and how did he get in the mix?
Tech and RZA go like super far back, and RZA did an amazing job of bringing his world to the series. So he wanted me to partner with Tech because they have a very close personal relationship. They go way back, and he knew that Tech would be able to, have a shorthand with him. And Tech as a DJ, there's like obviously a ton of DJ in the storyline, was really able to help us make sure that we were depicting things properly and the way RZA would like. And that's not the only collaborator that RZA brought. I worked with Math, his touring DJ and part of the group, in New York. He would come to our studio sessions and give us great insights as we were recording the guys. Inspected Deck wrote new verses. That's what you're going to hear in the clip that plays. Meth wrote verses. So like there was a lot of involvement from his whole world. And I think that really is what makes the show feel authentic and real and great.
Yeah, it's interesting. So the clip we're going to see is about cuts back and forth with a talent show at this place called the Park Hill, where they all kind of started doing their thing, and cuts back and forth to RZA's brother Divine, right? It's his brother.
Yeah.
And trying to survive in jail and repping for Staten Island in jail with a very ingenious defense mechanism, shall we say, which we'll see. So talk about the why you picked this clip and how this all came together, because it's basically two scenes in one.
Yeah, I mean, I picked this clip because when it was scripted, it was actually scripted with verses from Wu-Tang songs. So you're going to see three members of what, before they become Wu-Tang, they're at an open mic night, and three of them do verses. And I'm just going to pull up my notes because there's like, right. So working on this show, you had the actor's name, their pre-Wu-Tang name, and their Wu-Tang name. It's a lot.
It's the ODB first.
Yeah. So it's ODB, and that was scripted as a verse from Brooklyn Zoo. Method Man's verse, Shotgun, was scripted, What the Blood Clot. And Giz's verse was scripted from Words from a Genius. So that was three songs that they were planning to do that we just didn't have the budget for, and creatively they weren't totally convinced, because they weren't Wu-Tang yet, that it was right. So we had Inspected Deck write new lyrics, and I think he just did such an amazing job that it feels like we actually had to do a lot of new writing for the show. And what I'm super happy about is that they all feel like kind of lost Wu-Tang tapes when you listen to it. It doesn't feel like, to me, it doesn't feel forced or, from 2019 pretending like it's the 90s. It feels of the period. So I think it was rather successful, because in writing the lyrics, we had to be mindful of this cross-cutting that was going on and the storytelling of what was happening in the prison and all of that stuff. So I think that as far as swapping goes, this one worked out well.
All right. Cool. I think McHugh's computer shorted out for a sec, so he'll be back on. But if you can just kind of get into that clip a little bit while we're waiting, and let people know kind of your process behind that track and what it took to put that, on camera together, and how that, maybe the spotting went for that as well.
We knew we were going to work with the underlying beat, which was big beat. And I basically summarized what was going on in the scene and being mindful of the cross-cutting that was happening, and that this was the guy's first time on stage, and it's all the swag and stuff. Inspected Deck gave us lyrics, and all of the actors, aside from Dave East, obviously, this was their first time recording in a studio and rapping, period. So we spent a lot of time with the kids, rehearsing them and working with them in the studio, and putting that track together, which is entirely pre-recorded. It was not live on the day, but I do think that it feels live to me. But the kids did a great job. We expected Dave to do a good job, but I think that TJ, who plays Ace on ODB, really was kind of brilliant in the role overall. He does a lot of beatboxing through the season. And he really brings ODB's like energy to the series and also his heart.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
How often would you say your time was split between like being on set or doing pre-records versus, like the other, spotting sessions and the playlist thing and researching and clearance and all that stuff?
Well, there was a lot of set work on the show because it was decided early on that everything would be a pre-record. Right. So even like if you hear 2 lines of a rap, it was likely pre-recorded. So there was a lot of time, and they were shooting in Staten Island, which if you're not from New York, it's not the most convenient place. And our studio that we pre-recorded in was Midtown. So it was a lot of time shuffling back and forth for sure. This is one of those jobs that's like kind of consuming just because there's so much prep work.
Right.
You have to work with all the departments from props to set deck to make sure they have the right mics and the right turntables. And
right. You're actually working with the artists that, originally recorded the track as well. So I imagine their input was important. And
yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, Riza and Alex, it was like they were always final call on if a recording was working or not. So I luckily did not have to cater to other members of the clan. But like I said, in recording sessions, mathematics would come, and he was very helpful and lovely. And we definitely loaded the kids up with lots of material to wrap their heads around, the people that they were portraying.
Looks like
so I got a question for you. Let me jump back about Staten Island for a second. So when you said, I missed a little bit because I got bounced off somehow, but when you said you shot on Staten Island, so all the Stapleton Projects shots you see, all that is live on the streets of Staten Island. And then what about the in the house stuff and Bobby's house and things like that? Is that in the studio in Brooklyn or? Our
stages were also in Staten Island. So
Staten Island's got stages. That's different.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. So it was, everything was in Staten Island.
Cool.
When he goes to the record store to steal the equipment, that was Manhattan, but everything else is like Staten Island.
That's great. All right, let's keep moving around the room. Thanks. We'll come back to you. Rob, been really enjoying watching your show, Ramy. Talk about how you got involved with it and the process in picking the music, because I would think he would be pretty actively involved in because it's all him, right? So talk about the process.
So Ramy and I met a couple summers ago. I had met with and become friends with kind of the A24 guys, and they had introduced Ramy and I, and they had just shot the pilot. And, I think like a lot of collaborations, Ramy and I met and we just kind of became fast friends. And, figuring out the music for the show was a journey that probably took, a lot of these streaming platforms. As you guys know, sometimes we're working on 10 episodes simultaneously. And so you might not figure something out in the first episode until, you're halfway done the second episode. And so, we were a few episodes deep and kind of still figuring out the sound of the show. And it's such a unique show. And, we wanted the music to also represent that uniqueness and the unique nature of the story and the unique nature of Ramy's journey. And so, we kind of landed in this world where Ramy's living, where he's this, he's a Westerner, he's living in New Jersey, but he's so drawn to his heritage and his Eastern customs and religion and all of these things where his family comes from and his culture. And so, finding a lot of this Arabic music from the 70s and the 80s that kind of melds these two worlds, with traditional Arabic melodies and instrumentation, but then taking Western influences of disco and funk and folk and that kind of stuff. When we landed on that, it kind of made sense because it was such a good representation of Ramy's journey as well.
And so have you been sourcing music from Egypt? Because obviously the Middle East is big on hip hop, and such interesting textures coming out of there as far as mixing up the different types of music from their own, Middle Eastern dialect to just hip hop beats behind them. Talk about that process of finding and sorting through what you must be getting. And another question for you, follow up, is that show playing overseas at all in the Middle East?
So it's interesting because, there's a lot of, it's like anything when you kind of start to dive into something and start kind of, treasure hunting and figuring out where all this is coming from. And so a lot of the music we use, particularly the Arabic music, is definitely vintage, and that's fun. And there's definitely a handful of labels over there, Habibi Funk being one that's kind of done these reissues of these 70s and 80s kind of funk disco bands. And then there's a couple larger ones that just have these copyrights, like the clip you'll see with Abdel Halim Hafez and kind of these Egyptian heavy hitters from the 40s and 50s. And so, the clearance process is definitely, it's been a learning experience. And a lot of stuff gets lost in translation. That certainly takes up a lot of the time is the communication back and forth, and licensing world is different over there, and sometimes it barely exists. So we've definitely worked with people who have helped translate, people who've kind of gotten in touch with people that we couldn't find. So it's like any project, it's definitely a group effort, and it's all hands on deck for sure.
Cool. All right, well, let's talk about the clip we're going to show. I'm only on early season 1, so I haven't gotten here yet, but
no spoilers.
Yeah, talk about the character and why he's out there doing what he's doing, and the choice of music. I don't want to butcher the guy's name, but Abdel Halim Hafez, something like that?
Yeah, that's good. That works.
Okay. So talk about that piece of music, why, and also set up the scene with the character and why he's out there.
So one of the fun things about the show is we have these kind of isolated standalone episodes with these characters that, you kind of get some insight into who these side characters are when they get kind of these 30 minutes. And so this episode's about Ramy's father, Farouk, who traveled to the US when he was in his, late teens, early 20s to start a family and try and provide a better life for his kids. And this episode kind of tracks that journey and then what his life looks like now. A lot of his past and a lot of what he holds on to in Egypt, family he hasn't seen for decades. Soccer represents that in a big way because when he was a kid, that's what he wanted to be when he grew up, was a soccer player. And then the music, this is a big song in Egypt, and certainly one of, Abdel is kind of known as the king of music in Egypt. So this song kind of, scoring this final montage of him reliving his childhood through playing, turning on the car headlights and playing soccer out in the dark like he's a kid. This was kind of the perfect choice for that.
What I love is that, there's one scene in particular where I think it's a Ramadan episode where, he's like, hey, I'm going to go to the mosque and we're going to do this. And he's like, quiet, man. I'm trying to watch my show. The father and the mother, they're like all more Americanized than him. And so he's got this really interesting conflict about trying to hold on to his roots. And the guy who runs the diner, his buddy in the diner, that guy's unbelievable. He's like a show stealer, that guy. It's just a fantastic show. Yeah,
and it just, what we get to do with music is fantastic, but it's amazing to be able to tell this story in a way that is, and we try to do it with the music too, where it's such a unique story that we haven't seen on television at all, but it's told in this way that just feels so broad and so relatable. We've definitely tried to do that with the music too, where, we have all of this great Arabic music that, I think a lot of people are discovering for the first time, but it feels instantly familiar and recognizable in a certain sense.
Yeah, well, it's super great work. So let's keep moving around and we'll come back. Maggie, talk about I don't see you, Maggie. Let me get you up on screen there. Hold on, speaker view. Maggie, are you there?
Hi, yeah.
There you go. So Maggie, coming at us, we'll talk one at a time. Obviously, we got 2 shows that you touch base. We'll touch base on. The show Normal is funny because I was watching
Normal People.
Normal People. I was watching the Israeli show Prisoners of War, and I was like binging it. And every break, they would pop in with this commercial of these 2 kids from Ireland. I was like, oh my God. And it was like something, so I had to start watching it. And really deep, interesting show. Their chemistry is fantastic. Talk about working on that show. And obviously you have a co-supervisor in Ireland, right? So talk about that process of dealing with that.
Yeah. Hi, Juliet in Dublin, who's asleep. I came on a little late on that show and watched the first 3 episodes and was very excited about how quiet it was and how restrained the music was. And my pitch to restrained, my pitch to Lenny, the director, was let's even pull back more. Like I only want to hear source if it's diegetic, if it's actually, I only want to hear songs if it's coming out of a speaker, basically. And because the actors' performances are so authentic and beautiful. And I think the reason the show got so popular really, and like right when we were, I mean, it's an amazing show and it's an amazing book and an amazing story, but also it happened right when the pandemic hit and we were all sort of craving connection and touch and intimacy. And what the show did so beautifully was put us right in those moments with those 2 characters. And we didn't need music to enhance those moments. And so my pitch to Lenny was let's pull out as much as we can. And that's kind of what got me the job, I think. And so, our job, everyone knows this, it's a creative job. It's a political job. It's a heartbreaking job sometimes. Like I got a lot of pieces in there that I loved, and there were some pieces I didn't love, and I wish I could have taken out. And ultimately, I feel like it was successful. I got to enhance the storytelling. It was a fun process. I love working with Hulu because I've developed a very close relationship with the network, and I feel like I can be very frank with them whenever we're working on a show together. So it's so weird because I'm not looking at you, John. Like I don't even know.
I got to talk if you want to look at it.
Yeah. Like I don't know when to end.
But so for me, it was really interesting, being of Irish descent and going to Ireland for the first time a couple of years ago and going to see live music there. It was just a fantastic vibe. And obviously you covered, by using artists like Finn Regan and Lisa Hannigan and Metro Me, you really kind of covered a really interesting spectrum of Irish meets, different stuff, whether it was Elliott Smith or Imogen Heap, you know what I mean? So talk about that balance of using authentic Irish music with otherworldly musics.
I think that's where Julie and I worked very well together. Because so she had started the process and Hulu sort of brought me on. To be totally frank, I think what happened is Hulu realized they had a huge hit on their hands, like it was an Irish production and they knew it was a big book. But then when they started, I'm speaking totally, I have no clue what happened behind the scenes, but they realized they had a huge hit on their hands. And they wanted it to be broad, the music to be broad and appeal to everyone. And so I sort of came on to make sure that we were going to be appealing to not just a small niche of Irish artists. And so Juliet and I, I was a little worried about coming on late to the game. I didn't want to step on anyone's toes or, I wanted it to be a true collaboration. And she and I had our initial conversation. And immediately I knew there was no egos involved. She and I were both there to really make the show as good as possible. And she taught, so she had she knew a lot more, obviously knew a lot more Irish artists than I did. So she introduced me to a ton of Irish artists. And then I was there to sort of check her and check their team and be like, Lord Huron has been used a lot. Mazzy Star's been used a lot. There were a few other artists that you were the bellwether on overuse in a way. Yes, and like, you know, just like reception, like let's just, yeah, I would say, I mean, as much as I could, I was. And she, and we agreed on a bunch of, I mean, she and I had the same, I mean, it was, she and I had the same taste. It was so much fun working with her. And like Lisa Hannigan, I had worked with previously. I put her in Fargo. She was in Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, or Lucy in the Sky. So like we agreed on a bunch of stuff. It was kind of seamless as far as working with Juliet. And yeah, we wanted to be authentic to the place, the time period, but we also wanted it's a broad story. It's a love story. It's a story about your first love and having that sort of soul connection, and anyone can connect with it. I mean, I'm way older than these kids, and I immediately was right there in that, like when there's a lot of sex, their first sex scene, I immediately was remembering the first time I had sex. You feel uncomfortable, you feel awkward. And I think they handle it so beautifully. Like, you know, I was a little afraid for my mom to watch it because she's like this, she's not going to listen. She's really, but yeah.
I was reading an article about them and talking about the full frontal, how, you know, Lenny had to have that conversation like, hey, you know, this is a full frontal show. So if you want to do it, it's, you know, you got to go there. And that's definitely an interesting conversation to have in today's world, especially.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the best thing I did about the show is like, pull out, don't put music there. Don't put any songs in those sex scenes. Like I feel like the best work I did, you don't know. And it was taking songs out of those scenes because you don't want to be with the filmmakers. You don't want to be with anyone else except those two characters. And I spoke up a lot about, we had score, but no songs. So.
Right. A supervisor not advocating for music, that gets you a job. That's interesting. One last thing before we show the clip, the song Dogwood Blossoms, right? You use the song twice, which is rare. Talk about how and why.
Well, it worked beautiful. That was, Juliet picked that for the first time we use it, and I forget which episode it was in, but it was in an episode that we talked a lot about perspective, character perspective, Marianne Connell, and this was a song that it was episode 4. We were switching from Marianne's perspective to Connell's perspective, and we felt like that was the one song that sort of bridged their internal dialogues about the character, about their dilemma and what their whatever. It bridged their journeys, and it sort of, for Juliet and I, became it just was the one that spoke to both characters. So we kept going back to that. And then when we reprised it, we had another song in there that actually didn't clear. And so we were in a rush to find something, and we tried a bunch of stuff. And I was like, let's just see. And we were afraid that people were going to be upset with using it again. But I had actually been revisiting The Sopranos, which I hadn't seen since it came out 20 years ago. And they do that all the time. They reprise songs in the same episode, and it's super powerful because the audience has a connection to that song already. And whether it's subconscious or not, when you pull it back, you have that, like with the score theme, you know, and I thought it worked well, and it's contextualized differently when you use it later in a season.
Okay, so let's set up the clip. Obviously, this is not the two of them together. It's the photo shoot, and talk about why this scene and why this piece of music.
I chose this piece of music. For both my shows, I chose two pieces that were like wins for me. And I think everyone here knows that we don't have final say creatively. And the piece I chose for Normal People is a piece of music that Andrew Brady on my team suggested for this scene. And out of everything I listened to and out of everything Juliet and my team listened to, this was my favorite. I really didn't think that they were going to select this one because it doesn't have vocals. Again, this is about pulling back. This is a really sensitive scene emotionally, and it's a huge pivotal emotional scene for the character Marianne. And I thought if we would put vocals in there, we would be feeling the filmmakers and what's their comment on Marianne and in this situation. And I felt strongly that we wanted to be with Marianne. And so I threw this in as my favorite, not thinking they would ever choose it, but they surprised me.
Very erotic but sad, mournful. So
yeah, it's impossible to provide context if you haven't seen it. I would have to start talking about S&M. I mean, it breaks my heart. You have to watch the series, but that scene breaks my heart, and I get emotional every time I watch it. I've seen it so many times. But for me, that was the piece of music that let me be with Marianne the most during it. So that's why I selected it.
very emotional, sad, emotional scene. So quickly jumping on to the great. You know, part of, we had Dickinson last week. We talked about, you know, where another period show using contemporary music. It's obviously something that people are exploring, and it's cool. So talk about your work on this show.
Yeah, I will say I've been on the show for almost 2 years. You're going to see an end title clip. They're all end titles. There is diegetic source, but it's in the background. It's Russian folk music, or it's 18th century classical. I initially totally did not want big pop songs at the end of it. I felt like it had been done. It was kind of uninspired. I've done it before. But, you know, Marianne and Tony McNamara and Mary McGowan, the creators, because we had been working together for so long, it's sometimes hard to like tell someone like you don't like their idea, but I did. And we had a frank conversation about it, and they said, we hear you, but we want these songs at the end. And in this instance, I really feel like it works. It's the whole show is tongue in cheek. There's a wink the entire time with this series, and that's what I think is fun about it. So once I got over the hurdle of like we're putting big pop ironic songs at the end, we had a lot of fun, and they were very literal. Like Tony McNamara, he's the guy that wrote The Favorite. He's a phenomenal writer, and it was all about lyrics. So it was hard to choose my favorite. But this one is Susie Quattro, who's a favorite of mine. And I've tried to get her in shows or movies for forever. I don't know why. People don't know her. I feel like when you send over a playlist, you almost always know what they're going to choose, because almost always people pick what they know. But Marianne and Tony were, to their credit, like very open-minded and listened to everything I sent and picked the best. And yeah, and just have to apologize before we send the clip. And I said this earlier, like if you know the song well, there's a music edit that's going to bump you. But again, it goes back to the literal, we have to get to the right word. But I love the song. And to set it up, it's the 8th episode. She's like, it's that inevitable, like everything's going her way right before we cut her down in the last 2 episodes. So
Yeah, it's a great one. And for those who don't know, you know, Susie Quattro was basically Joan Jett's inspiration, a rock star. And she, you know, my friend was Susie Quattro's publicist. I remember telling a story that Joan Jett waited all night in the hotel lobby at the Riot House on Sunset to meet Susie Quattro when he made it happen to come down for breakfast, and introduced her to Joan Jett. And that was Joan Jett's lightning bolt moment.
Really? I hadn't heard that story. I mean, and she's like never, I've tried to get her in so many things. I don't get it. But like, so for me, that was like, I like my whole team knows, like, I think I celebrated with the bottle of, I was so fucking excited.
And and you know, people ask those questions, like, do you save up songs? And I was like, absolutely, man. There's a band called the Blue Nile that I've been trying to get in.
I love that band so much. Downtown Lights. I've been trying to get.
I worked with them at A&M Records years ago, and I always promised Paul Buchanan that I would get a song in a movie, and I still, 15 years, 20 years, and I'm still trying. But yeah,
I got Rocky Erickson in another Hulu show, and I've known Rocky. I grew up in Austin. My dad went to school with Rocky. I've been trying to get Rocky Erickson in for 15 years. When I got him in, I mean, those are the moments that we all
checking those boxes.
Yeah,
musical supervision boxes. All right, well, thank you, Maggie. We'll come back, but let's keep moving. Manish, working on one of the great music properties from a music movie to a music show, High Fidelity. Talk about the process. How do you guys get involved and your partners on the show?
Well, I supervised this with Tom Wolfe and Alison Rosenfeld over here at Aperture, and we came on board. We had a meeting with the showrunners very, very early on in the process. I think just when it was just a pilot for Disney Plus. It wasn't a series, or it was just kind of like an idea and a property that they were interested in launching on the new platform. And we had been talking to them very early on, and it was a show. At that time, it was based in Los Angeles, on the east side of LA. And we were just excited to be involved in a very music-heavy project. So we just made it very clear we were on board and game for whatever. And then kind of over the course of, the next many months and the development of the show, it went from just being a pilot shooting in Los Angeles to casting Zoe Kravitz as not just the character, but just to be the executive producer of the show as well, moving it to New York, and no longer just a pilot, but just a series order. And it, went from there. Then, the training wheels were off and we were hit the ground running.
And obviously, with such a great musical property from a book to a movie, and then Zoe Kravitz coming in and Lisa Bonet's history in the film, how involved was Zoe as far as music involved in the process of picking music?
How involved was Zoe?
Yeah.
Zoe's very involved. I mean, and that was getting her. It was a asset for everyone involved, not just for the show, but just musically. She's got a great ear. She got a great taste in music. And one of our, just in our very first meetings, we just started exchanging music and playlists and stuff. And it was just clear that, we shared a lot of similar tastes and genres and eras of stuff. And it was a relief just to know that it wasn't just going to be an actress playing this character. It was going to be someone playing this music lover who truly was a lover of music herself. So it was very cool to kind of follow her and take her lead, kind of in a similar way, like I imagine RZA and the Wu-Tang. It was kind of like, let's let her dictate where this goes and how do we support that. And, that's what we did.
Mm-hmm. And what do you like, how many averaging? Because you set place in a record store. I did a movie years ago called Empire Records, and it was, wall to wall music. How many cues are you averaging per show?
Man, it was a lot. I by far, it's the most music used per minute of show that we've worked on. I think, I can't remember the numbers, but I think there's something like 20 songs in the pilot, maybe 30. I don't know. There are times where, there are some episodes that have 20 to 30 songs in a 25-minute episode of television.
Just an example of that, this is probably the only clip we've shown in weeks of showing clips that has two songs in one, basically. So talk about, obviously, the scene taking place in a record store. You're going to hear wall-to-wall music, but the disparate nature of these two cues and the people that want to play, and how to program music for the listeners and themselves in a store. So talk about this, if you wouldn't mind setting this clip up.
Yeah, so this is a scene in the first episode. We're still meeting the characters. We're meeting Simon and Charisse, who are the friends who work in the store with her. And a big part also of taking from the movie was about introducing these characters as her sidekicks, but also their own taste in music. And so it was very clear that we wanted to kind of just pick music or styles of music that were going to not necessarily just define their characters, but just add to their characters and help with the storytelling. And we knew going into it that Simon was, he's at this point in the process, this was the first episode. So it was the one of the first few days of shooting that we were still trying to define who this character was, but we just knew let's just find something obscure. This is a guy who goes, crate digging. He wants to find some obscure, vintage original pressing of an album. So we knew we wanted to kind of define him with that. And then when Charisse, we knew that then to introduce Charisse's character, she's going to come in and have a reaction to his music and put on a song that would kind of define her. Well, so the interesting story behind that is that was a reshoot. That was not the original song that she came in singing. That was scripted. So this was one of those things where this was one of the very first things that we shot early on in the series. And so we had to find something for Simon, some rare original pressing of a record. And they asked, so what could this be? What original, do you have any ideas for what this could be? And so I asked Alison, I said, well, what's the last original pressing that you just bought from somewhere that you're super proud of? And she said, well, this Lena Platanos original pressing. And I said, great, well, that's it. Let's send them, let's see if they're into that. And so we just sent them the song. They said, this is great, perfect. How do we get the record? And we said, well, it's an original pressing. We can send you ours, but please don't damage it. And
gotta get it back.
You gotta give it back. So it was a really quick decision, really easy, easily made. And we sent them Alison's copy of it, and it came back a little bit damaged, but we were just happy that we could kind of provide them with that type of instant solutions to something like that. And also when it's kind of a fun thing when it's something that Alison gets to pull right out of a record collection and just say, well, this is it. And
as music freaks and collectors, what we do is the ability that you're being able to do that on a high profile, legendary, show like that, where it comes from a movie and then from a book that has fans through generations, is an amazing blessing to be as a supervisor. So you guys are having some fun, obviously.
Yeah, I think, I think that's like all of us who do this, that's a big part of why we do it. And we love music, and to be able to kind of be that person for them in the midst of this, and to actually utilize our own record collections for the show was really cool.
Right.
But then what
the original was? What the original
Sorry?
script? Can you say what the original cue was?
For when Charisse walks in?
Yeah. Because you don't think she's a Dexy's Midnight Runners fan when you first see her. It was actually a really great scene, and when the way it was, but I think what it was when the season was done and we realized that this is how we're setting up these characters, and this is very early on in the show, I think there was a general thought of, well, how do we make this moment maybe a little more fun, instead of it being a very specific character song moment? How do we, and I think that the direction they asked us for were just like instant recognizable sing-along hits, one hit wonders that you put it on and no matter where you are, who you are, you just start singing along with it. And so that was the new direction for what this Charisse song was going to be, because not only was it going to be Charisse coming in and putting this on, but also then the song comes back again and it reprises as like a montage of the three of them closing up the record store, having fun together. And so it needed to be a song that kind of accomplished a few of those things within the storytelling at this very early stage of the series. And, as a supervisor, you're kind of, sometimes you're not the most thrilled about, having to find something that's really on the net, like really maybe an obvious choice, or, what's like an instant recognizable thing, especially for a show like this, that wasn't necessarily the part of the brain that we were exercising most, or that we wanted to, but it really in the end ends up kind of being a really good reminder of it, because my 15-year-old daughter loves the show. She wants to be Rob, and she wants to work in a record store and smoke weed. That's another thing, but I don't want to talk about that. So she
has this song now on her playlist, and I hear it coming from her room, and she identifies it with High Fidelity and this specific moment, which I think is super cool. I mean, I know personally as a music supervisor over the years, I've used it in at least 4 or 5 big montage, scenes in movies or TV shows. And, but the fact that it can be discovered on this show by someone specifically for its use in the show is cool, even though it's been used elsewhere. Yeah, and that just ends up being kind of a cool reminder of especially with a show like this, that we can straddle the line between finding an obscure pressing of something, but also sometimes it's great to a great one-hit wonder that everyone knows and loves.
Yeah, no, this one is what I call a Shazam show. Like, you got to have your phone on your lap to be able to keep hitting it. Before we go to Mary, just a quick question from the people out there in the world, because you mentioned the pilot, right? So the question is, music selections for a pilot, are they kept once a show goes to series, and how does that music budget change? Does that first episode the pilot and then that stays, or talk about the music fabric of that?
You mean for this specific show? Or?
Yeah, this particular one, for example.
This specific show, it didn't operate as a pilot, just because as soon as Zoe came on board, it became a series. And so we were working on it as episode 1 of 10. But generally speaking, you work on a pilot, it has a budget and you work within it. And then if the show gets picked up, anything can happen. They could add to your budget. They could slash your budget. They could, it's kind of a wait and see what happens.
Cool. All right, Mary Ramos, you still there?
Muted. Hold on.
Mute myself.
Hey, that's Mary Ramos.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, I was just texting Hunter because I was like, oh, this clip I chose, I don't like it anymore. Now I want to do the other one because you guys all have these really cool clips. I love all these shows.
First of all, this show, it's interesting for me. My wife had read the book and she's like, oh my God, we got to watch the show. And it's like, I was like, but obviously Mary Ramos did it. And it sucked me in. And obviously you have some really great uses of music. Talk about the process of music for this show. How did you get involved and what's the process for you working with your crew?
This one was an interesting challenge for me. But I've worked with Kerry Washington's company before, Kerry and Pilar. And so they brought me in. It was an interesting challenge because, Reese Witherspoon was one of the producers and she had such great success musically with, Big Little Lies. And obviously it was, the desire to, have something that gave this show a musical personality, big shoes to fill on that one. So one of the things I wanted to do when I first came on it was, kind of embrace the female energy of it all. I love that you watched it with your wife. I mean,
well, I had no choice, but the bottom line is, again, it's
you're clearly not the audience.
It's a little melodramatic for me, but the characters are so strong and the acting is, those two are so great. They're such great actresses that you have to kind of get sucked in.
Yes, the performances are so great, and this is something as music supervisors, I know we all kind of struggle with is when the performances are so good. Kind of almost any song works over the performance, so it really comes down to like making the thematic choice or making it makes the decision kind of hard. So one of the things that I came on board with was embracing the female energy and wanting to use. Is a Machine from Florence and the Machine as the composer because I love her style. I'd worked with her before on a film called Assassination Nation, and I just knew that she could bring the boom, crashy fire that I was looking for this story. And in her infinite wisdom, Dawn Solaire from ABC was like, she's never scored before. This will not fly. And she suggested that we pair her up with Mark Isham, who's a seasoned composer, who's really well known for his beautiful melodies. He's just, I love Mark. He's He's a
super guy and amazing
new person, right? And he's never going to say no, right? So, and the two of them actually worked beautifully together. So that was number one. The second one was, I knew it was set in the 90s. I knew that the showrunner, Liz, had an iPod full of, iPod, Spotify playlist, sorry, dated myself, playlist of 90s stuff that she grew up with, that she loved, and that she was definitely wanting to use. And I came in thinking, this is set in the 90s. There's so many shows that utilize 90s music as the thing. And so one of the things I really wanted to try and do was kind of bust out of some of the stuff that's been used a lot, because it's stuff we don't want to do. We don't want to use the same.
Nope.
And so amazingly, Susie Quattro used in these other things. It's like, so she's not from the 90s, but I was just telling Maggie before that I actually stood up out of my chair and screamed when that song came on because I freaking loved it and had wanted to use it in something else. And they kept turning it up. They kept batting it away. It's like, sweet. Anyways, so one of the things I wanted to do was really to kind of avoid that that binary of like using things from the 90s that all have been used quite a bit, was to really try and make playlists on for the characters based on what I knew about the characters, which started out one thing and then some of them changed. I made extensive playlists for characters you never even hear from. So Moody, the character Moody, had amazing musical taste. We never hear from him. But it was really fun to really come up with the music for Mia, Kerry Washington's character, because she's the one character you do hear the stuff she chooses to listen to when she's working on her art. And one moment, which I wish I'd chosen instead of this, was when she's working in her own apartment, smoking weed, completely lost in her art, completely lost in the moment, and she's got her headphones on, and she gets rudely interrupted by Reese Witherspoon's character, Elena, and who walks into her apartment without, using her key without, being invited. And, the editor had ideas, everybody had ideas and stuff, but I came up with this song, I Walk on Gilded Splinters, Dr. John's voodoo song. And it is such a cool
I love that use
vibe, and it's such a voodoo-y kind of, it just kind of, and her character actually seems like she's lost in it, and it is really a rude interruption when Reese walks in. But
obviously this scene we're going to watch is a powerful scene where the mother has kind of been moving the kid around and just doing her own thing, and the kid's kind of got to go where she tells her to go, and the kid finally gets to this town and rebels against her and is like, no, this is where we're staying. And there's a huge conflict between the two of them. And so is this song meant to be on the nose? And I mean, about dead on the character. And also, is this cover, what Ruby's cover is, when was that done? Because I hadn't heard that version.
Oh, we created it. So that was another thing I wanted to do, was like, it's not a new idea to do covers. Let's do a cut, but one thing I really thought would be great to do is utilizing covers of songs that kind of had our themes in them. We used Uninvited by Alanis Morissette. Well, that'll be a telemarketer. And we used, things that meant something to the characters, and the montages they came over, or that they played over. We also wanted to use female singers, and we wanted our composers to do the covers, to produce the covers, so that they felt kind of seamless with the score. And so this one in particular is important to me because it's a flashback episode. It's the 6th episode. You don't know why Kerry Washington's character has such a hard shell, such scar tissue, and why she's responding the way she is. And you kind of finally get to see it in this episode because, spoiler. And so we did try, okay, and this is another music supervisor thing. The editor fought very hard to keep the song that she had put in there and cut the sequence to. It's a sequence where Mia is driving away from the life that she knew, and she's taking her new baby with her that she's stolen, essentially. And it's a time-lapse montage of Mia just driving, and the baby grows up, and Mia, the young Mia, grows up into Kerry Washington's Mia, and you see them going from place to place to place in their nomadic lifestyle, and she's left everything behind, her lover, her brothers, funeral, her parents, everything, just burned it. And the editor had put in a song that was created for a movie. I won't say what song it was, but it's a cool song. But it's a song that was created for a movie about kids killing each other in a games situation. You know what I'm talking about, right? It's a reality, and they're hungry. I'm not going to say the name of it, but you know what I'm talking about. And it's a cool song, and it was just had this like extreme drama to it, and it worked in one sense, but I swear I was going to throw myself out a window if we ended up using that song. And it stayed in, and thankfully, I have to say again, Don Soler came in and and was the voice of reason and allowed us to make this change. And this song just perfectly, I think, encapsulates, the characters, and the arrangement of it was important to turn it into a ballad.
So, Mary, how did you pick Ruby to do that version?
We had a list of singers and gave them to the executive producers to listen through, and heavily, and we gave them a short list of singers. And Ruby actually has a relationship with Reese. So that was a really positive thing too, because, Reese is very, very involved in the music, and it was important that she be into it. And we wanted to have singers who had diverse backgrounds, and they represented our two main characters. So, I think she killed it. I mean,
all right. Well, we got time for a couple questions. I want to go around and ask a couple questions from the chat room. Stephanie, talk about your new situation. Another great Shazam show that I love is Insecure. Issa Rae came to our award show maybe 2 years ago, Guild of Music Supervisor. Maybe it was the 9th or 8th anniversary. And the quote was, basically, my shows are nothing without music supervisors. So this is a woman that just made a deal with Atlantic Records for her own label, has started a supervision company. And so talk about your new situation there and working with her and what her plans are to create this new music world of hers, because she's obviously, between her and Kiera on that show, they turned me on a lot of music. So talk about it. You're muted, unfortunately. Can we unmute Stephanie? Angela, there we go.
Okay, thanks. Obviously Issa is music, and she's also passionate about discovering talent. And I think radio is a very natural extension of her brand. And for me, it was a very fortuitous pairing in that I have had my own company for a few years, but I was definitely looking to grow the company and strengthen relationships with writers and artists, and just kind of touch all aspects of music and what music supervision can be and do. So we're actually both represented by UTA, and my amazing champion of an agent, Maxim, connected us, and we had a lot of shared passions. And so, we, on the radio side, we have put out Timar, who's also in Insecure and on the soundtrack. On the label side, we've also put together writing camps for not just Insecure, but another show that we have coming out called P-Valley, which have been super successful. We have a music library that we've been cranking on that just sounds, it's just been the thing that's been missing from so many of my shows. So it's just a really exciting time. There's just, I'm now working with all these cool people on the publishing side, on the label side, on the library side. And she has amazing energy and great leadership. And yeah.
Yeah, it's wonderful when, showrunners and creatives come along like that who are creating amazing content and really bring music along with it and take people like you and add them to the fold and just create more and more and more and give great opportunities for artists to have their stuff placed in some of her shows. She does great work on. Another question for Rob and maybe Manish on the language side, because obviously on Ramy, you're using a lot of foreign language stuff, and because like we just heard Lena Platanos, a question from the audience was about when you're using foreign language stuff, how much work do you have to go over the lyrics, making sure that there's nothing objectionable going out there in the world, because obviously everybody speaks many languages. So Rob or Manish, if you guys can jump on that. I know Manish, you're muted. Rob, are you still there?
Yeah. I mean, Ramy's pretty good in terms of we're kind of always in constant contact, and a lot of my job, I feel like, is figuring out tone and feel, and kind of hitting the right emotional chords. And I do feel like, oddly enough, more often than not, lyrics end up lining up pretty well. But Ramy's really good at kind of screening that and immediately being like, well, this is kind of about this. It feels a little bit off. But yeah, generally speaking, we're kind of in a constant dialogue, and he's good at kind of quickly translating and having a discussion about that.
So his Egyptian is pretty solid by now, right? He's got it down. Okay.
Yeah.
And Manish, like I said, that song, Lena Platanos, and you're obviously using songs from every continent on that show because you're using hundreds of songs during the season. Talk about how you guys look at the some foreign language records.
I don't think that really comes into play so much on the show. Like, for example, the Lena Platanos use isn't really specific about her lyrics or the lyrics of that particular song. It's more of just a situational moment of him putting on that song at that moment. So we don't really dive deep into what did the lyrics mean, because that's not why he put on the record.
Sure.
But in general, in the show, like if they're just listening to something that's a foreign language song, and if it's just playing on a radio, it's not something that we're doing specifically for the lyrics, so we don't dive into that.
Right. Okay. Well, we're about 80 minutes in now, so I don't want to keep everybody too long, but I did want to thank you guys all for being here today. Our panelists, you guys are awesome. Thank you so much for coming and doing this. And let's just keep talking on Zoom because we still can't seem to get together. Everybody stay safe. Have a great holiday. And we'll see you on Thursday. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.